News more twisted than soap operas.
Ugh.
And with worse actors.
Can't be serious.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
And this is TNT Radio, and this is the Robert Brennan Hour. And this is the Hour of Decision. And the lady of the hour I have with me is Burbidge. Now, like many politically apathetic Queenslander, my experience or interest in politics up to the last couple of years was just going to the polling booth every few years, and that was about that. But Jewel has had a way of, for many years now, of trying to engage the public with an interest in politics and civics and the like. And so this is with a group the founder and president called Voting Matters. So Jewel, tell us all about Voting Matters.
Hello, Robert. Thank you very much for having me here. Voting Matters, we are devoted to political education and information. The reason being, as you say, Australians are apathetic about how we are governed, and they just let things happen. And then they complain when it doesn't go well, but they never engaged in the first place to help make decisions about who's going to make decisions in our governments, who are we going to send there. And so I just wanted to encourage people to be more responsible about their right to vote and to use it in a way that is going to be best for the whole country. So people weren't talking about things. And I thought, okay, I'd better start some sort of group up. And I just started with a few like-minded friends, and it's grown. It's been 6 years now, and it's grown exponentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what do you do in this group, or where do you meet, or how often do you meet, or how wide is it dispersed throughout the region?
We meet regularly once a month. Mm-hmm. I have the main group, we call it a forum, mm-hmm. a community forum, and I have an ally in Ipswich, a nearby city, and we are going to be expanding all around Queensland. I'll speak later about our expansion plans. And what we do is I get people with policy expertise. It may be a politician who has expertise in a particular policy area, and we look in depth at policies, particularly contemporary issues, and that puts the people at our meeting in a better position to gauge the quality of the decisions made by politicians. If we know about the policy areas and have a better understanding, we can be in a better position to judge the kind of job that they're doing in government. So we just simply get a little bit more involved in the political process because, frankly, for a long time now, I'm 71 years old, mm-hmm. and my entire life I've just noticed, I'm sure everybody else has, they very rarely get it right. Mm-hmm. So we need to keep an eye on them. Mm-hmm. And so we find out information about perhaps contentious issues, but most certainly contemporary issues, and then we're in a better position to gauge the quality of the decisions that are made in Parliament.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And any examples of the kind of themes that you've tackled in the past and the kinds of speakers that you've had?
I've had multiple speakers. Mm-hmm. Well, for instance, just recently I had a Queensland Senator, Senator Gerard Rennick, who is in one particular party. He is going against the rules and dictates of his party, and he is putting the electorate ahead of what his party expects him to do because he strongly disagrees with the stance that they are taking on the management of COVID. And he wants to bring to their attention that there are consequences for the decisions that are made and people are suffering. And so by doing that, by going against the dictates of his party, he's made himself extremely unpopular with his party, and yet he's possibly one of the most popular politicians in the country right now because he is putting the electorate's needs first. So that's the kind of thing that I do. I get people like that, and people turn up very keen to hear the perspective of someone who will stand up for the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Gerard Rennick, the liberal, non-liberal member of the illiberal Liberal Party, you could say.
Yes. He doesn't really fit in that party.
He's hardly a fringe player, isn't he? He's very sober-minded and
a very solid person, and the man has dignity, and I really admire the stance that he is taking. He said to me, Jewel, I'll die on the hill with this one. He is standing up for people who have had adverse reactions to the experimental. It's not a vaccine. I'm sorry if I step on toes by saying that, but it's clearly not a vaccine. It hasn't had any long-term studies done. It is a medical experiment, and people are being affected very adversely. A very close friend of mine is in Melbourne right now comforting her sister because her 40-year-old husband was injected, came home, got in the shower, dropped dead. Mm-hmm. And these kind of things are happening. This is the reality. It is, of course, swept under the carpet, and of course we can't prove that there is a direct correlation between his injection. But, you know, the man played professional football for Ireland when he was younger. He's a very fit 40-year-old, was, and now he's dead. These are the kind of things that are happening, and not enough investigation is happening. Whereas Senator Gerard Rennick is just saying, well, we need to address this.
We need to have this conversation, yes. Because if the let's call it a vaccine in inverted commas, if it is innocent, then not having the discussion sort of just tends to just increase the suspicion. But if it's guilty, then, well, we ought to have it on trial.
Indeed.
Like any kind of medicine or therapeutic. Yeah. So yes, we had Gerard Rennick, and he's been a great advocate of yours truly in the, let's say, the matter of regulatory overreach of health professionals.
Yes.
And whom else have you had on?
Very soon after Gerard, I had Professor Ian Plimer from Adelaide, and he is a world-renowned expert on earth sciences. He has published many books about this contentious issue of good old climate change. And he comes from a perspective of massive geological background and career, and of course everything he does is based in science, and he poses some very valid questions about the narrative around that issue. So his talks are always very well attended to, because unfortunately any kind of questioning about the popular narrative that the mainstream media may be pushing is silenced and put down. So places like my forum are places where people can have a platform to just get up there and just tell the truth. In fact, the thing that resonated with me when I first started setting up the forums was I saw a quote from Melanie Phillips. She is a commentator on the BBC in the UK, and it really resonated with me because I thought this is what needs to happen with political discourse. She says that the great political struggle of our times is not between left and right. It's between those who are connected to truth, reason, and reality, and those who are not. It reflects a fundamental division in the West whose fate will be decided by its outcome. So since then, this goes at the bottom of all my correspondence, and every one of my meetings we focus on truth, reason, and reality. No hyperbole, no spin, and no emotions. We just look at the facts and we expose them for all to see and to make up their own mind.
And to have a discussion around
and
it.
A
dialectic too.
Yes.
One would hope start from a position of facts or putative facts and work towards the truth.
Yes.
If at all possible.
Or at least give the truth a hearing.
The good, the beautiful, and the true. Yes, that's right. And okay. And so, what kind of people attend?
People who vote.
Yeah.
I once was approached by a marketing expert who kept saying to me, "What's your target demographic?" I said, "If you're over 18 and you're alive enough to fog up a mirror and you can vote, that's it. That's my target demographic." And he said, "No, is it young people, old people, educated people?" I said, "People who vote. Everybody can vote." And people need to think about what they're voting. So it's really an extremely wide target market. Because we live in Australia, we have compulsory voting. A lot of people will just simply go through the motions because they'll get fined if they don't vote. I want people to really think about the responsibility of walking into that booth with pencil in hand and making choices. So it doesn't matter whether you are an 18-year-old fresh out of school and don't know what on earth is going on, or you're a 98-year-old with a huge experience in life. You still get one vote, and I want everybody, no matter where they come from, to think about where they're going to put their vote and give the power to somebody to rule our lives.
And so that people are also informed about the issues around which candidates will frame their campaigns. So
Yes.
there'll be talk about, of course, COVID, and you had yours truly speak about COVID, and
Yes.
and there's climate change, and you mentioned that expert that attended your group that evening, and political candidates will also talk about royal commissions, and you recently had an
Yes.
expert in royal commissions.
I had a professor who is one of the foremost experts in the country on royal commissions. He will be coming back to speak about the Constitution as well, because he's also an expert on that. I have other professors who have constitutional expertise who unfortunately are stuck in Western Australia right now because they are locked down. I must tell you, Robert, one of the most popular speakers I had was you. Everybody absolutely loved hearing the truth about the medical situation behind all of the decisions that have been made around this so-called pandemic. And people just embraced the message that you had, which was based entirely on facts and science. And people absolutely loved your talk. So I'm very grateful to you for having come and joined us.
Well, it's an evolving picture, isn't it? And so I'm pleased to have been right on most things COVID. Okay, and so all these ideas that are exchanged that equip the voter with a meaningful understanding of or a perspective,
Yes.
one could say, on the matters of interest.
Yes.
Going forward to an election, as we're going to be doing this year, and that's just the federal elections, also state elections. And so I guess implicit in all this is what the benefit is to the voting to the audience, but and how that might tie in with voting. But what inspired you to start all this?
I had a political epiphany, if I suppose you could call it that. I had been involved in politics as I was younger, and then I became disillusioned, as so many people do, with all of the games that people play in political parties, and I walked away, as so many do. And then while I was away from politics, like everybody else, I noticed the deterioration in the standards, and certainly the standard of the people who were being elected was just going downhill fast, and I still didn't get involved. But then there was a period in our history where there were a number of absolutely outrageous things happening all over the world, and I was tired of seeing on the television children being blown up in shopping centres and really inexplicably horrendous things happening, and yet the response from governments just seemed to sweep it under the carpet, not really address the issues, and people got away with these things. And I thought, well, what's going on? Why aren't these matters being addressed? And then I had all these thoughts in the background, and then one day it was so simple. I was just hugging my beautiful baby grandson, and I thought, I'm on the downhill run in life. I'm getting old. I'm not going to be around your whole life. What's this world going to be like? What am I going to leave as a legacy for you if I don't at least try to make it better before I pass on? And it was the love of my grandson that put me in a position of, I've got to get involved. I've always related to Edmund Burke, the famous 18th century statesman, philosopher, Irish politician. And many people will recognise where he said that all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Mm-hmm. And I decided, well, I can't do nothing anymore. I've got to at least try. And so I just started talking to like-minded friends, started having meetings, and it grew in popularity, and it's just grown since then exponentially. And people are very grateful for having the opportunity to come together and talk to each other. This is something I absolutely insist on, because in this day and age, everyone's got their head stuck in a device to get information or get opinions. It's always in a tablet or their phone. They're not talking to each other as they did in my youth. They're not interacting, and they're not bouncing ideas off each other. They're just getting everything through a device. And so I thought, I'm just going to buck that trend and go back to the way things were when human beings liaised and interacted with each other. So that's what I do. I'm just devoted to keeping people aware, educated, and making responsible decisions.
Yeah, it is amazing, kind of, shall we say, the psycho-developmental shift that occurs when we become parents or grandparents.
Yes.
That I know that that's true of myself, that I immediately began to take an interest in the future that I didn't otherwise have or didn't previously have when our child came along. Why? Because now it mattered, and it mattered in a big way. Yes. And so when you were talking about Edmund Burke, it calls to mind I guess you could say the essence of conservatism, according to Edmund Burke, is that we sit within this an ever-enduring slither of the present,
yes,
where we are custodians of, let's say, the past that is given to us, whatever traditions, whatever economic structures and economic prosperities, God willing, that we have, as something that we've inherited and something that we were given to be responsible with by our forebears, and so that we can hand it on to the next generation. So we sit with the past, the present, and the future all within us at the same time.
Yeah.
As a sort of like a double responsibility to the past and the future. And that being what one could say is arguably the essence of conservatism, we have a Conservative Party by name in the UK,
yes,
and a Conservative Party by allegation, you could say, in Australia in the form of the Liberal Party. But have they shown themselves to be conservative this past couple of years?
Well, most certainly the culture, as I have observed in my 71 years, it has changed radically in these so-called conservative sides of politics. And many people lament that both sides of politics, which used to be diametrically opposed philosophically and culturally, are almost carbon copies of each other. And the people who have those, well, let's call it conservative ideas, they just lament that I don't see anyone there to represent me anymore. They seem to have abandoned the principles that upon which these parties were based, and they have gone, I guess you could call it, towards the middle, but likewise the other side of politics has abandoned their bases, such as, for instance, the Labor Party was always supposedly representing the workers, but I don't see evidence that they are first and foremost in the thoughts of the Labor Party these days. I think there are more globalist influences. So people just don't recognise either side of politics anymore, and people despair.
And globalist, not even in the sense of the international socialist, but the international feudal, corporate, supra-corporate, building back better, all of that sort of thing. That seems to be the place. That and the bourgeois, bohemian, inner urban. One who would say they are standing up for the worker, but really, what connection do they have with
Well, a lot of people who come to my meeting, they've often been in the Labor Party, for instance, for 50 years, and they say, I don't recognise them anymore. They do not represent the worker. They've abandoned the worker. And people who have been a lifetime in the Liberal Party here in Australia, they feel that they have been abandoned too. The free enterprise, the standing up for small business and championing people being self-sufficient, they see, well, nobody's actually representing those viewpoints anymore in our side of politics. Everyone feels abandoned. And a lot of the other parties, it's my observation that many people are in those parties, like the Greens, for instance, and here in Australia there's a party called One Nation. Many people in those parties are there simply because they can't bear the thought of the two main parties any longer, but because they just simply have abandoned their principles. And so a lot of people, they're protest voters very often in these small parties. Of course, there are people dedicated to the message in those parties, but a great percentage of people who have left those major parties are just looking for a home politically. And there has been a development in Australia recently, even though it's started a few years ago. There is a party here called United Australia Party. It's been around for quite some time, and it had a certain perspective and policies that were pretty acceptable to a lot of people, but not everybody accepted the motives of the people running that party. But now there's been a parliamentary leader who has joined into that party, who is a very different type of person, who has established his bona fides. And a lot of people are looking very seriously at that as a viable option for the same old red and blue. I honestly think that this next election is just going to be fascinating, and I have no idea how it's going to go. Right today, we have, what is it, people say there's 1 million people have gone to Canberra.
Yes.
From all over Australia.
Yes, I was sorely tempted all week.
Yeah.
So yes, so our choices in red and blue are between the faux idea of the sentiment of supporting the working class.
Yes.
The echo of a sentiment, a simulacra of supporting the working class on one side, and on the other side, a group of individuals who would do anything to get power, and their only other criteria would be, let's say, that they don't fit in with the union movement. It just doesn't.
Yes.
It's not their thing, perhaps.
Well, originally the divide, that political divide, was capitalist versus socialist, and these two parties have just evolved out of those diametrically opposed ideas, I suppose. But at the moment, they're just all. Both sides are run by career politicians. There are many young people who will go straight out of school, straight into university, perhaps studying political science, and if they're on the left side of politics, they may go into a union office or an MP's office, and likewise on the other side of politics, straight into an MP's office. They have never been out in the real world being responsible for making their own money. They just simply feeding off the system that is there, and the whole time that they are working, they are looking at politics, not policies, politics. And they have not got real world experience. And these people end up being rewarded by getting pre-selection for going into government. And they're dangerous people. We are seeing the result of that with the decisions that are being made. This country is on its knees. And the people making these decisions are not fit to make these momentous decisions.
And as I keep saying, not due to a virus. But because
indeed.
A virus is rather dumb. All it can do is enter a cell, replicate, burst out of the cell, and on it goes. Whereas closing a border, issuing a diktat, slapping a fine on someone, slapping a mask on someone, telling the police go here, go there.
Complete overreach.
That's the outcomes of human action.
Yes.
Of policy. Yeah.
But any thinking person can observe that this is not just this country, it's every country in the world, all at the same time. And you think it's not planned?
No.
Are you kidding me?
No. Well, that's an interesting conversation to have, is whether the simultaneous speaks of a plan or the simultaneous speaks of the commonalities in the vulnerabilities of our psyche, to which our leaders are not immune. Yeah, something of the two.
Their mantra of "bring back better" that they're all saying around the world.
Build back better, yes, yeah.
Yeah, and that comes from the World Economic Forum.
The WEF, yes.
And sorry people, you've got to read a few books and just see how well everything's going according to the scenarios that were laid down by a number of very influential people in the whole world, and it's going very nicely, thank you, according to their criteria. Well, they're happy, but we're not.
So, I think we're going to go to a break in a moment.
Okay.
And we'll get back to it in 2 minutes.
Okay.
All right.
Email from school about the incident today.
Scary.
Tell me about it. Did you have any idea that was going on?
None. I mean, you saw Derek at the game last night, too. Did you have a clue?
No, but teachers like me, parents, we don't always know as much as you guys do. Kids hear first about what's going on with other kids.
Half the time, it's rumors.
It can be hard to tell sometimes, but if you're ever concerned about a friend who's having trouble with alcohol, prescription drugs, bullying, violence, anything, you need to tell an adult. Mom or me, a teacher, coach, school counselor, someone you know and trust.
Dad, no kid is gonna tell an adult about that kind of stuff.
I get it, but if we don't know, we can't help. Speaking up about a problem, that's what helping a friend is all about.
For more information, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
It was a Thursday, 11 years ago.
I can't remember saying goodbye to her.
The last thing I ever said to her was, "I love you."
There'd been an accident.
Unfortunately, your mum's been killed.
She died of head injuries.
Somebody had been arrested and he'd been on his phone.
I grew up 10 years in a second.
Everything died on that day because that man decided to pick up his phone.
There's nothing that is so important it cannot wait. Don't use your phone whilst you're driving.
If it feels like it's hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk, it probably is. When it's 86 degrees outside, asphalt can reach a sizzling 135 degrees. Hot enough to cook an egg and your dog's feet. Be safe. Test the sidewalk with your hand. Avoid midday walks and walk in the grass. Bring along water and rest in the shade at the first signs of heat exhaustion, including heavy panting and stumbling. Go to PETA.org for help and information on how to keep your dog safe in hot weather.
When you need to know what's going on around the world and at home, keep it on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
This is TNT Radio, and this is the Robert Brennan Hour, and I have my very special guest, Jules Burbidge, who is the founder and president of a community group called Voting Matters, which collects people every month in a common forum to discuss matters of great public interest, of public policy, of health, of government policy, and it's the kind of thing that can inform them best as they move forward to the next election, be it state or federal. It's something where the community can be involved in matters of politics and civics, and sort of a departure from the usual backyard barbecues, Bunnings and beaches on the weekend. Yeah. So, Jill, this past couple of years has seen the ferment that's resulted in, let's say, the giant protest in Canberra today.
Yes.
Which I imagine that the people who attended that today wouldn't have dreamt that, if they were sitting with their life coach 5 years ago, and or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, and they're working on their 5-year plan, they wouldn't have possibly anticipated what they were doing today. And so there's been a seismic shift in the political landscape.
Indeed.
In Australia.
Yes.
So the people that attend your forum, the numbers I imagine have grown greatly.
Yes, most certainly. COVID has certainly got people
Yeah.
more interested in the consequences of political decisions.
Yes. When they could attend, that is, there were times when when that sort of thing was off limits and we were in.
Yes,
lockdown.
we have
Yeah.
we have hurdles put in our way.
Yeah,
yes.
so you had casting the broad brush at the groups that attend the Brisbane Forum and the Ipswich Forum and the like. What are they telling you?
They're telling me that they've had enough.
Yeah.
Enough is enough.
Yeah.
And dare I use it's almost a hackneyed phrase these days because the mainstream media has done it to death. These times are unprecedented. And you will hear that very often in mainstream media, but it absolutely is unprecedented. People say to me, oh gosh, this is almost as big as the Vietnam War. And I say, now hang on, I'm old enough, I was around then. Mm-hmm. This absolutely dwarfs what was happening with the protests in the Vietnam War, and those who are my age would probably be nodding in agreement right now. Back then you would have people taking to the streets who may have been university students or politically active people who were very upset about conscription, etc. But the numbers were certainly substantial, but it happened rarely and didn't really have much of a disruptive influence or consequence. Mm-hmm. What we are having now with these rallies all over the country, all over the world, of mums and dads and everyday citizens from every walk of life getting out and saying, we're not happy, take notice of us. This has never happened. It is unprecedented. Mm-hmm. And it is absolutely fascinating. A moot point, look at Canberra. That's never happened before.
It's huge.
What's happening today, it is just enormous. Mm-hmm. And of course, one wonders what kind of coverage it's going to get on mainstream media. Mm-hmm. Is it just going to be dismissed, or some politicians going to take notice?
Well, I did see one quote-unquote mainstream media headline where they headlined it as anti-vax mandate protesters, which was a nice shift rather than just the ad hominem of, they're anti-vaxxers, but rather targeting that, no, it's about a matter of the mandate.
Well, they do like to label people, don't they? Yeah. And they like to sort of put an impression out about a particular group, which may or may not be correct, but everyone has to be put into some sort of collective label. Mm. And of course they use the word anti-vax. I know some very, very intelligent people who were very annoyed at people such as myself. I have not had this so-called vaccination. And they say, what's wrong with you? You know, there's measles and there's all those other things that people have vaccinations for. Why can't you just have this one? And I say, they've had proper studies. Mm-hmm. This has not had proper studies. It's come out too quickly. And there are already adverse reactions. So why can't I have a question mark about the efficacy of something so quickly rushed to the market with such adverse effects? Why would I put myself in that position, particularly at my age? I actually do have a quite rare condition that's congenital. It's quite likely that taking one of these formulations would actually kill me because there are so many of them that actually affect hard things. So why would I take that chance when there are absolutely no studies about the effects on people such as myself?
And whether you're wrong or you're right about you being at risk in virtue of having this particular cardiac condition, the fact is that it's your anxieties and it's your choice. And nobody ought to have the right to thrust it down your throat or into your deltoid simply because they have a difference of opinion.
I hear the word anxieties, and I think that's possibly the wrong connotation, Robert. I'm not a person who gets anxious. I'm a pragmatic realist, right? You know me well enough to know that. And the reason I pick you up on that is very often the approach taken by people who do not understand that some people will not accept this medical treatment. And it puts a connotation of almost like I'm putting myself up as a victim. I'm not a victim. I'm a rational, logical person. And I like to make decisions based on fact. And there aren't enough facts there. I do know facts like when the swine flu vaccine was put out all those years ago. I think it was something like maybe 56 deaths or some very low number, tragic as they are, but they pulled it off the market with that tiny number of adverse events. And look at the hundreds of thousands of adverse events around the world right now, and they're still pushing it.
Yeah, well, at the time, the Tamiflu was the thing that they wanted to take the market by storm, and I think they ended up dispatching with most of their supply in the end. Yes.
Yeah, it's just I think it's not prudent to accept these things without question.
I guess I was projecting out to you some of my own motivations, because I've been publicly quite frank that the reason why I'm not having it, above all else, notwithstanding all else, some of your concerns I might share, is that I don't pay a ransom for my own freedom. I'm not going to. I'm not going to negotiate with the terrorists that way.
Well, it's coercion, isn't it?
And the listeners will be aware that many on our side, so to speak, have been double jabbed, and yet they're beginning to feel had. They're beginning to feel like, wait a minute, it isn't going to stop at 2.
Well, I'm asking you as a doctor, has there ever been a vaccine that needs to be repeated a few weeks or months after the initial injection? I mean, aren't they supposed to last for years or for life? I've never seen anything like that.
I look at this. It require a much longer answer, but some dislike the term vaccine and like to call it a genetic therapy, or even you could call it an epigenetic therapy in the case of the Pfizer vaccine. I look at it as a political object.
Oh, yes. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the example I use is something like breast implants. Now, a breast implant is a medical object. It's a surgical object, and it's a surgical procedure, and there's all the considerations that we might have with that. But that's not what it's about in the vast majority of cases. Some cases, yes, but in the vast majority of cases, that's not what it's about. It's a social political object. That's why the person gets the implant.
Yes.
And so to look at it just in terms of, let's say, basic therapeutic benefit or basic biological harms misses the whole point entirely. And that's what I see this vaccine is. It's only a tiny part a biological object or a medical object. It's a political object with a political aim in mind. But getting back to Voting Matters.
Yes.
So, your membership are those who are various places on the spectrum of disenfranchisement, with the major parties being Liberal, Labor. I imagine you've also got some people who are the kind of agrarian socialist kind of people that would tend toward the Greens.
Sustainable people.
That kind of faction of the Greens.
Yes.
And so they're all telling you that they're fed up. Yep. They're all telling you that they're going to shift in a big way.
Yep.
And so that moves us on to, and implicit in what I just said is you're not affiliated with any particular party.
No, not at all.
And you don't get funding from any particular
party. I get funding from nowhere. No. That is actually a sacrosanct rule that I have for my meetings, and many people admonish me about this, but I absolutely refuse to charge for people coming to my meetings. Because I say, if you are a pensioner or a student or a disabled person or a homeless person even, you have every right to hear political discourse as much as anybody who has got money. So I absolutely refuse to charge for my meetings. I do ask, if you're in a position, I would appreciate a gold coin donation to help me cover my expenses. But my expenses are very modest. I will travel up and down the highway, and I will go on the toll road. So, and being on a pension myself, that is quite a hit to my own budget. So it helps me with those gold coin donations to pay the toll fees and a little bit of petrols, for instance, public liability insurance. But I don't get any other money at all. I get venues that are free, and I'm very, very grateful for the people who are, particularly in the hospitality sector, who at the moment can't do anything for me because of the mandates. And I just keep the expenses down. Everybody who is associated with me is a volunteer. Nobody gets paid anything. So there's no funding behind it. It is just simply people in the community coming together, and it's almost like a neighbourhood think tank, I suppose you could call.
That's a very good way to phrase it. And so what are your plans with Voting Matters in the lead up to the federal election?
In the lead up to the federal election, I did a talk fairly recently, again, courtesy of COVID. I was invited to come and speak to fairly large gatherings, about 2,000 people there, and you spoke there as well, Robert, you might recall. And as a result of that, because I was talking about people want to know, who am I going to vote for to get us out of this mess? So what I had devised was a very simple little decision matrix where there is, down the first column is the names of the parties, and across the other column headings were a number of questions focusing on this single issue of the management of COVID. And all I expected out of these parties was, what is your position on this? Are you for this or are you against this? And, so you had yes, no answers. Now, when those answers were put across the rows, and I gleaned all of that from their public utterances, it was very, very clear to see where parties stood on this issue. And on one side, you could call them freedom parties who will not accept all of these mandates and all of these restrictions. And on the other side are the ones who still seek to suppress everyone and to keep them under these conditions. And these are the people that most people just don't want to vote for. So that was extremely well received. I've had a number of people approached me since then, and one of which was a lovely lady who has lost her job because she is a nurse of 30 years' experience, and she absolutely refuses to get the jab, shall we call it. And she had an idea that people have got to vote these people out, but they don't know how to vote. I've got to teach them how to vote. She didn't know what to do. So she heard about me, approached me, and I said, well, take this decision matrix that I have devised, and we will put that to every candidate in every electorate to see where these candidates as individuals stand on the issue of this COVID management, which, let's face it, is responsible for all of this suppression and the mandates. And she just loved the idea. I also said that we really want to keep an eye on the results in every single electorate. So why don't we have scrutineers in every booth, in every electorate, in the whole country, and let's have a parallel tally room just to keep an eye on things, because there are lots of questions about how the tally is counted and recorded. It may be completely above board, but wouldn't it be nice to just have a bit of check and balance? So I had these ideas, and she just loved that idea. We have joined together, and her organisation, her name is Deirdre Abel, and I imagine you'll probably talk to her in the near future. And the organisation is called Stand Up and Vote. Mm-hmm. So I am now on the steering committee of that, and I give them the political advice. And very often, because a lot of people on the committee don't have any political experience, it's good that there's somebody like me there with years of experience that I can say, well, you can't say that because that's not quite correct in context, like a devil's advocate, if you like. So we're working together. It's like a joint venture. And you would be amazed at the amount of organisations who are seeking out Stand Up and Vote because they too want to be part of affecting the way people vote in this next election.
And this is where you can bring individual candidates to a point of accountability rather than just saying, well, we're just going to hold to the party position. You can show them this matrix that I've seen. And so for the listeners, of course, who don't have a visual, along the top there's all the issues, be it mask mandates, business closures, state border closures, international border prohibitions to travel.
Jab for jobs.
The jab for jobs. You've got all of those all those issues along the top, and then down the side you've got all the individual parties.
Yes.
And so, of course, there'll be some parties where now there's the cross, the red cross, which means, or the tick. The red cross means that they're for it. They're for
they'll just say yes or no.
Yeah, okay.
And
Yes
some
or
will
no.
say, I don't know, or I don't comment, and they will just have a question mark. And that in itself will be almost like a kiss of death, because at the end, all of those answers, and this will be for every candidate in every electorate, and then we will reorder the way they have answered. So we're going to have a traffic light system. Green for the ones who are against all of these things, and amber for the ones who are a little bit each way, and the ones who are embracing this suppression of the entire economy and the freedoms, they get a red dot.
So
okay?
right now your matrix consists of evaluating the parties, where there's parties like the Liberal and the Labor Party that are red light across the board.
Yes.
And then the parties that are green light across the board, what are they?
United Australia Party, Liberal Democrat Party, IMOP, Informed Medical Options Party. I think there's the GAP Party, Great Australian Party, and other small parties are pretty much against all of these
And
mandates.
what about the Katter Party for the North Queensland?
The Katter Party, it's a little bit of an amber.
It's a
according to the utterances of their prominent public speakers, there are some question marks about some of the directions given by some of their politicians. So it's not entirely embracing the freedoms that the other parties are. So it's, an individual may change that position.
Yes.
This is why we're going to ask every candidate. So what's going to be produced is this matrix with the names of every candidate in every electorate. And it's going to be in a very tight timeline. We're going to give them a questionnaire. They all get it at once. I give them 5 days to get the answers back. And they'll answer yes, no, or question mark. And then we will reorder them. We will also produce a simulated ballot for that particular electorate in the same order that the ballot draw has happened, with the red, green, amber dots next to them, so that people can take that into the booth. They decide, okay, there might be 3 green parties there. They decide who gets their number 1 vote, or 2 or 3. We don't tell them who to vote for. We don't tell them who not to vote for. We just tell them where these people stand on this issue, and you decide what's important to you. If you're a person who's very happy to see all of these lockdowns and mandates and people losing their job, and okay, you will stick with the red dots. But at least you can certainly, as the saying goes, sort the wheat from the chaff, whichever part of the spectrum that you stand on. We are just simply putting people in categories, I suppose you can call it, and people can rank them within those categories themselves.
But that's extraordinary, because this is a metric where we're not just looking at a single variable. We're looking at It's about COVID, you could say. But
yes.
But it's that from masks to international borders and no jab, no job. There's a great number of issues at play there.
Yes.
But we're so divided that there are parties that are literally all red or all green,
yeah.
and almost nothing that's just a mixture. It's either red or green in this sense. It's extraordinary. And that just that brings us back to the beginning of our conversation, where what really is the difference between Liberal and Labor Party, or you could say the Liberal National Party and the Labor Greens unofficial coalition.
Yes.
What's really the difference between them?
Well, many people would ask that same question.
Yeah.
It's certainly not as obvious it was in times past.
So people will have a choice just of what colour they like their authoritarianism to be, either blue or red, or if they're into the so-called freedom parties, what's their favourite between them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we encourage people to do their own research. And if you are going to change a lifetime's habit of voting, as many people are rusted on to the red or the blue, for instance, okay, do your research. I also teach them where to find information I teach them about the legislation that is behind elections. People have not taken any notice of that before, but they are starting to sit up and take notice of that. So that's what Voting Matters is doing in conjunction with Stand Up and Vote, and concentrating on that before the election. And after the election, we will still keep associated. We are two separate entities. And, of course, as we come up to the various state elections, same thing will be happening. With whatever the most, not so much contentious, but the issue du jour, if you like, at the time that an election is held. And it's possibly the most important issue. So we will be finding out where candidates stand on these things so people are in a better position to make an informed vote.
And if other issues came up in the interim between now and the election that were equally as important, for example, the question of the support of Australian involvement in a possible war in Ukraine, or digital ID, or the position with the China question.
Yes.
Would you include that also in the matrix?
Well, it is of course possible. Yeah. What I am afraid of is the interest level of people. If you bombard them with too much, they're just going to turn off. Let's face it, we Australians are pretty apathetic. But the reason I focused entirely on the management of COVID as this central issue, and I do believe it is going to be an election, focused very heavily on that as the most important thing. I just thought, let's just keep it simple, because this particular issue actually encompasses everything that is happening. All of the other policy differences, good old net zero and climate change and whatever, they've been around for ages, and people have all of these different ideas of that. That is not affecting everybody's daily life to the extent that this particular issue is. So fine, focus on one issue. And maybe in the future we might just, as an exercise, focus on something that is really vexing people and that they need some clarification on it. We will see what happens in the future. But I don't want to overburden people with all this barrage of information. I want them to pay attention when they do get something from us, that it is considered to be absolutely crucial information.
Excellent. And so, Jill, if people wanted to get in contact with you regarding Voting Matters and Stand Up and Vote, or SWAV, and how you want to roll it out across the country.
Right. Voting Matters, by the way, what I will do, and I'll concentrate on this after the election, I have people videoing things, so we're going to share that with the whole country, and we're going to expand nationwide. SWAV, they have a website, standupandvote.com.au.
So standupandvote.com.au.
Right.
And
Voting Matters is in development. Votingmatters.com.au. It should be coming very soon.